Todd Risterselli, he was the editor of the Water Ski magazine for a couple decades, or I don't know how long he was, but he asked me one time, I was like, what was the trigger? Like there's some sort of trigger that you had where like things changed, where you really got addicted to it. And my addiction came from when I learned that I could adjust my equipment and I got better. Like I could feel the difference. Like I went out there and like I felt the difference and I got better. Like I skied around more buoys or whatever it was. When I realized that I was in control of my own fate out in the course, that was the end all be all for me.
Okay. Welcome back to the Water Ski Podcast, episode 3. I just landed from San Francisco, California, where I was there competing at the California Pro-Am, 17th edition. I can't remember, maybe this is my 4th time, 5th time, something like that. But I hadn't been there in a few years. We hadn't been in Brentwood, in the original site, in a few years. So it was a strong, fun weekend of water skiing. Personally, not very strong. I prepared pretty well. I was skiing well, and then I got there, misgrabbed the handle 2-ball at 39 first pass, and basically went to 3 with one hand and one wrist. And so I ended up somehow zigzagging 3 at 39. And that tournament being like qualifying for the finals, you need to have a strong average across the 2 rounds. And so I knew that with that score, I was virtually out of the game. And then the second round went even worse. But besides that, just got back from San Francisco. And on Saturday evening, I had a chance to interview a very good friend of mine, Nicolino, as we call him in Italy, Nick Parsons. Nick, also known as the Yeti, is one great water skier. A lot of success under his belt, few pro tournaments, World Cup stops, wins. I believe he topped the 2010 elite ranking, like the whole tour. But Nick especially is a super interesting character, and I was very eager to do this interview since I knew he was going to be in California for the tournament. And so we did this interview roughly around 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m. after the barbecue that Debbie and Greg Badal always put up for the skier on Saturday evening. We were looking at the lake, just a few lights, 2 camping chairs, and we just started talking. I've known Nick for a lot of years, and this is a very particular Nick that transpires from the microphone. He's not the usual, let's say, extrovert and I don't want to say loud, but very out there Nick Parsons that all of us skiers know him for. He's a much more collected and introspective Nick, which I think makes this interview all the more interesting and hopefully all the more enjoyable for you guys who are about to hear this. So yeah, a few words before we get into this interview. Thank you so much for those who are constantly donating to the podcast. I'm recording this, and I recorded Nick's interview with my new microphone, which I hope you guys enjoy the quality. I'm also keeping track very systematically of how the podcast is doing across different platforms. If you are listening to this and you haven't subscribed, please take Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever you have, whatever you use, subscribe, because that makes the podcast go up in charts and gives exposure to the sport, which is really the whole point of why I'm doing this. But yeah, without further ado, here's the interview with Nicolino Parsons. All right, Nick. Well, welcome to the Water Ski Podcast. Thank you for giving me this interview. Excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Matteo.
Okay. So, one of the big reasons that I wanted to interview you is your passion about Europe, and you've been coming to Europe to do a lot of tournaments. But before we get there, I'd be interested in knowing, how did you get into water skiing?
Okay, so for me, water skiing was father-based. My father got into water skiing, free skiing. My father had a bakery, and so my grandfather did well. So he had a boat, and my father got into free skiing, and then he found a course, and then what he found was a private lake, one of the first man-made lakes, like in the U.S., like 79 or 81. They built one in Utah, and my father heard about this. He was my dad was a good free skier, so he found this place and went out there and was like, so what do you go around these buoys and you do this sort of thing? He's like, yeah. Okay. So at that time, my father did well enough with his baker that he had started, post my grandfather's, and he's like, how do I get in this? And he got into it. So like, I was born in 82, and they did, like, I grew up with my father learning how to water. Like, my dad skied, I learned how to ski together.
Okay, so it's kind of like your dad got into the sport pretty much around the time that you started into it. Was it kind of like a joint venture? You know, like you guys sort of learned the skiing trade together?
I was my dad's best buddy. Yes, that's exactly what it was. Like, we progressed together.
Okay,
we learned together.
There you go. And so, tell me, like, when did you start skiing? What age? When did you do your first tournament? Like, what were the early years like?
So the rumor that I was told always was that, so in 1982, my dad found out about this lake, and it's out in, the Wild West of Utah.
Right.
So he goes out there with my mom, who's pregnant at the time with me. It's like, we got to see this place. Like, I heard I can go out there. I can water ski, but I want to know about this thing where you go in the buoys and you go out there. So he goes out there, and he's obsessed with it. And so what I was told is that, yeah, my dad does it. The day I was born, from that point on, how do I get into this? And so my dad found a way to get in there. And from then on, my dad and I have been skiing forever.
That's pretty cool, man. And, it's interesting how, you're obviously from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm from Italy. If I hear Salt Lake City, Utah, I think snow skiing. I don't think water skiing. And yet, your dad found a way to water ski, and you followed along. Do you remember, like, your early days, like you're, getting on one ski, trying the course for the first time, that sort of thing?
I very much remember that. I remember our summers were short. And I remember, like, progressing through skiing and everything, like making it all the way to the college level, and like thinking that water skiing was not international at all. And then once I did make it to the college level, I met Canadians. I was like, why are they even skiing? They're Canadians. Like, are you kidding me? I'm like, I'm from Utah and I'm already from the north. I can't even believe it's happening. But collegiate water skiing opened my eyes that, like, I had no idea water skiing was a international sport as far as the tournament scene went.
Yeah. And yet you've skied so many international tournaments over the years, right? Like, you've been coming to Europe a bunch. You went to world championships around the world. You got to do World Cups, around, like, all over the world. Like, what, I guess, obviously you're a competitor, and so you're going abroad, but to me, it always seemed like for you it was more than that. It was more than just like skiing 6 buoys in this remote part of the world in Asia. There was more to it.
There was an opportunist situation that happened, like, for me. Like, there was good water skis. The guy moved to Utah, and I took advantage of that. And that guy funded me to go across the world, and I did all the stuff. And there was the athleticism side of my situation where, like, okay, I was good enough to, like, be funded and be an athlete and do well with that sort of thing. So there's people who move to Europe to the Florida, or they moved to warmer climates, and they. But I was lucky enough to have both, like the athleticism and the funding, and it was
Yeah. And do you remember like your first international tournament, the one where, because you said like it opened your eyes to the fact that this sport happens worldwide. What was your first international tournament where you went and were like, wow, this is like a worldwide thing going on?
So I had a semester at Arizona State, and that was like I was 19. I was like my second semester of college, and at that moment I had no idea that skiing was an international sort of thing, and we went to the Collegiate Nationals, and at that time there was De Gasperi and there was Will Asher. Well, De Gasperi at that time didn't even speak English. Like, I remember shaking his hand, and he literally didn't speak English. And Will Asher was there from England, obviously, and it was, I like they beat me, and like I was like, I didn't know that they existed, and I'm like I didn't know water skiing existed outside the U.S. And it was the most it was the most eye-opening thing in my life. But what I realized is that like they knew that water skiing was international, and that they were competing against U.S. guys.
Right.
And so it was, I don't know, it reinvigorated my whole water skiing life, because I was almost borderline forced to ski because my dad did it, and like, this is what we do. We go out, this is our summer. Yeah.
And yet you get into collegiate skiing, which, I'm sure that was an interesting time for you. And then you got to meet all these international people who, for better or worse, they were doing the same thing that you were doing. They were trying to get through 2 red buoys and turn 6 and shorten the line and continue that until that didn't work.
Mm. But I almost felt like they were at Louisiana or whatever college they're at on a scholarship because they wanted it. And I went to Arizona State because, it was a family affair. Like, I grew up skiing with it. This is what you do. Boom, boom, boom. I was just going with the motions.
Right. And so by then you're a teenager, getting into your 20s. You had already, I'm guessing, represented the U.S. at some tournaments.
When I was 19, I think I went to the under 21 Worlds there in Chile in 2003. And I remember being completely unaware of that. Like, I went to a couple tournaments out here in California, and I remember like running mid 39 and swimming the dock and walking down the dock, and not aware of what was going on. But I forget his name, but the coach approached me and it's like, Nick, you're good enough to go to the under 21 Worlds. They're having them down in Chile. Would you like to go? And I was like, I didn't know this was a thing. It even existed.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, I'd like to go, whatever. But yeah, so I had to sort that out, and I ended up going. But those 3 years when I was like 19 and 21 were eye-opening, because I literally didn't know water skiing was international.
Yeah. And yet it is, right? Like, and there's plenty of nations that compete in it. There's plenty of nations where you can go and compete at, like, or to. And I think what has always struck me about you is that you've taken, like, possibly since you discovered that, you took advantage of that opportunity as much as possible. Like, I'm from Europe. I'm obviously like 6 years younger than you, and I've seen you at so many European tournaments.
Well, at that moment where at that moment when I figured that water skiing was international, and I could attend them, it was like, okay, well now I'm learning something. Now I'm learning the culture, the language, and what's going on, and like I'm learning different people, and that I'm competing against I'm competing against people around the world. Like that was a different motivation than where I was living at home in the U.S. and my dad was quasi forcing me to ski.
Right.
So at that point, that was a changing point in my life.
So basically, skiing and correct me if I'm wrong, it became from something that you were sort of forced into, possibly you enjoyed, but kind of something that you were channeled into, to then finding out this whole international side of things, and now you have your own motive, I'm guessing, to, explore the world?
Well, it's not just necessarily exploring, but it was at that point, it was like, man, okay, this is something new. This is new, and this is new, and like, this is an equipment-based sport. This is international, and I was learning something new at the time, and so like that was a whole new life for me.
And I want to get into that because, like, obviously, you are one of the guys, in my opinion, that knows the most about equipment nowadays. And you mentioned that, like, it was an international sport and an equipment-based sport. And you collaborated with a brand of skis for a long time, which I'm guessing you learned a lot of the trade there. What were some of your initial sort of like, I guess, discoveries about the equipment we use? Because we are a bit of a weird sport, in my opinion. Like, we're not snow skiing where there's like hundreds of millions of dollars investing in high-tech research on the skis, but we're not surfing where we're still hand shaping stuff. So where do we stand, and what were your early learnings about this?
You know, my early learnings were probably like, you know, we're here now at Diablo Shores and like California, and I remember watching a video where Andy Mappel and Greg Biddall did a video or a learning video or something about skiing. And Andy Mappel himself said, he's like, I tend to follow sports that are individual based, equipment based, and not team sport based. And it was eye opening for me. Like I watched. I mean, that was 15 years ago, and I was like, why would he follow? And he gave examples like Formula One or golf and stuff like that. I was like, why does he follow that? I don't get it. Like, I mean.
Yeah, like we're not following like basketball.
Yeah, for example, perfect. Yeah, basketball. Like why does he not follow that? Like, and it was it hit me. I was like, yeah, why does he follow that stuff? And so like Formula One is a great example. Like there's great equipment and there's great athletes, and I found that very profound.
Right. And so you got into it and you had a chance to not only ski at a high level, but also to be involved with the construction and development of the equipment that you were using, right? And what were you eager to learn at first? Because I'm assuming you got involved and you were like eager to learn certain things.
So Todd Risterselli, he was the editor of the Water Ski magazine for a couple decades, or I don't know how long he was, but he asked me one time, I was like, what was the trigger? Like there's some sort of trigger that you had where like things changed, where you really got addicted to it. And my addiction came from when I learned that I could adjust my equipment and I got better. Like I could feel the difference. Like I went out there and like I felt the difference and I got better. Like I skied around more buoys or whatever it was. When I realized that I was in control of my own fate out in the course, that was the end all be all for me.
Right. So not only you were like in charge of in control of your destiny as an athlete, like your moves and your technique, but also like you had an opportunity to control the equipment that you were on.
Yes.
Right. So I guess that was the first realization. But let's go a little bit more in specifics. Like, what are some of the initial things that you wanted to learn and that I'm guessing you learned?
What were some of the initial? So say that again.
So like, you know, I'm guessing shapes, bevels, like the technical stuff, like flex, rocker. Like, what were you eager to learn at first, and what were some of your initial discoveries?
Well, I think I was very eager to learn like what the previous generation knew. So I was always very aware of like people that were older than me that I was starting to beat. Like I realized there was a point where like people had been in the sport for a decade or more, and I was still young but still beating them. And I was like, why am I beating them? What's going on? Am I better than them, or is it my knowledge of the equipment? What is going on? And I mean, To be honest, I think it was almost knowledge of equipment. And the equipment was evolving itself. And yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, and so I'll try to probe you a little bit. Like you were working for Dave Good, and like that brand had a lot of what I would consider revolutionary or out of the norm shapes. Like there was a lot of experimenting for a few years at Good going on, where like there were new shapes, new things that people had never seen. And I'm thinking like the wide ride, or like very strange things that were coming out of the brand that nobody was really, I guess, trying as hard. What was your involvement, and did you learn anything from that experience?
I was fortunate where there was Chris Rossi, who had worked with Dave Good before me. And pretty much I found skis that were modified or worked on that were basically in the trash or in the trash pile. And I went in the back of the factory and scoped them out. I was like, why are these here? What's going on? Why are these like this?
Right.
And I put the effort in to go out and try them and learned from those and built on those things. So, I mean, essentially it was an evolution. I learned from my predecessors and moved from that point.
Yeah. And I guess one of the interesting things to me about skiing is, like about skis, is that maybe you sometimes try to narrow down your attention on one characteristic, say rocker. Let's take one, okay. Rocker. And then you change something, but then it's funny how it's like all a synergy, right? Like it's never just one thing that would determine a better or worse feeling, right? Like there's always like, it's hard to isolate variables. That's what I'm trying to say. So when you're thinking of a new shape, because now you're with D3 skis, right? When you're trying to come up with a new ski, or you're trying to better a ski that you guys are already producing, what is your process? Like, what do you go through in order to come up with a new shape?
So I skied for good skis for years, and then the biggest like growth in my whole knowledge of like what is under my feet was changing to a different company and how they produce skis. And at the point now where I am at is like I'm in a better place than I ever was. Like I am complete understanding of what's going on with my feet currently. But it's a group. It's a joint effort, and so I'm not the driving force. There's multiple driving forces going into a ski and what people want, and that's how it is with every company. And it's what is interesting is to speak with different people from different companies and their points of view, because sometimes it can get very secretive, which bothers me. I mean, you want to have a conversation with people from other companies, and it's like, well, we're on secret stuff. I mean, we can't talk about that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and I guess, competition and I want to try to sell more skis than the new guys and all that sort of thing. But like, I can see from someone like you who really values equipment and what, like even just the evolution of what would be a better ski, there's got to be a little blocking, right? Like you want to try to absorb what others are experiencing, and that might not be viable all the time.
I mean, yeah. The older I get, the less I see the more of the athlete in the actual athlete as I do see what's under their feet. I mean, maybe I'm being pessimistic. I don't know, but I see what's underneath their feet than I see more what the athlete is doing across the course.
Yeah, and I guess you'll talk with, any athlete, any skier, I will tell you like the equipment is crucial. Like, and every skier will recognize it. But then eventually we all fall into I need to change my gait, or I need to move my hips here and there. Whereas it seems you are able to stay very much focused on what's under the feet and the equipment that we're using.
You could take it from a consumer perspective. Like, I want to buy the best product that gives me the most buoys. So, what is that product? Like whatever is inherent in the athlete. I need to try everything out there, and learn from that perspective. So, um, it's it's a two-dimensional sport. It's the athlete, and it is the equipment.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go into a little bit more, like, I guess, specific details. Was there a ski in your career that you tried and then you went, what's going on here? There's something to this. I need to understand it. Like, positive, like one ski that you tried, you went like, whoa, there's something to this that I need to understand.
There's been a couple skis. There has. So let's see. There was the HO Monza. I remember trying that ski. The HO Monza was the first. I think the first ski I ran 39 or 10.75 to our Euro friends, like back to back. I was like, how is this happening? Why? What is like? That was eye opening for me. It was like, what has changed underneath my feet that I'm running more buoys? Like, why? And it was because I hadn't changed. So it was fascinating to me. Like, the smallest of differences can make such a huge impact. So HO Monza, and then I remember trying. Well, there's good water skis, not to promote that brand because I don't ski in it, but interesting topic. Let's see. Well, I'm at a lots of words, but at the time, there was we made some wide rides with Good, and I ran a lot of 39s with them with Perfect Pass, but that was a different speed control system, and things have changed since then.
Yeah, like and that's the other thing about our sport. Like, there's so many variables that at the end of the day, skiers are going to test skis, and skiers have to deal with everything else that changes: boats, skiing in different sites, speed control systems. So it's always hard to isolate, right? It's always hard to say, okay, it's this the next thing, or is this what's going to make me run more buoys, or is this what's going to make, I guess, as a person who works for a company, whatever that is this what's going to make a lot of people run a lot more buoys so that we can sell skis, right?
So I feel fortunate to be like in a circle where I can communicate with, say, Dave Wingeter, who is programming and designing skis for HO, or I work for a guy named Will Bush and Creed, who are designing skis for D3, and we can communicate freely. And I'm not sure where I was going with this, but I'm glad I worked my way into this, where I've learned I can edit this out, but I'm not sure where we're at.
Yeah. No, look, I'm just happy to talk to you, man, because I think you are one of the most complete skiers that I know, in terms of interest, and you know a ton about skis. And I heard you, because just to give you some context, we are at the California Pro-Am. We're sitting on the side of the lake. We didn't ski very well today, so we don't get to ski tomorrow. And we're here just talking about skiing. And one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about is your knowledge and your journey into understanding equipment better, right? The other side that I want to know is, let's face it, compared to most American skiers, you ski a lot of tournaments abroad, and you have a fascination with skiing beyond just US, right? And just share with me some of your best memories. Like, best memories, some tournaments that you did in Europe or Australia or Russia that stayed with you obviously you went back home, but you cherished that.
So my father and I, we grew up at like kind of idolizing like individual sports, you know, like snow. Like I grew up in Utah. Like Utah, like snow ski racing and all that stuff is it's like Italy, where it's like, you know, it's you see the athlete, you know, it's an individual based. So when I finally got the opportunity to go to Italy, to Europe and ski there, it's like, you know, like I'm going to Europe. I'm to me it was at the time it was big time, like big time. I'm leaving the country to go do the sport that I just learned how to do, and so I mean, it's a big thing for me to get out, break out, learn a new language, or I didn't learn the language, but I mean like to experience a new language, experience what goes on water skiing wise outside the U.S. So,
Yeah, and I mean, let's not forget you had quite a ton of success abroad. Like you had some wins. You finished one year where you were like number one ranked skier in the world. I mean, you had some solid success, but more personally, like what are some of the episodes that stand out? Like for instance, like when every time you come to ski the San Gervasio Pro-Am, you land in Switzerland and you drive through the Alps. And you know, I know there's much easier ways to get to my site. You could fly into Milan like everybody else. What is this fascination with Europe?
So, I mean, I realized that people were flying into Milan. That was like an hour and a half away from the site where we're going to ski at your place. And what I realized is that you could fly to Zurich, for example, or Munich, or you know, like, and it was 3.5 hours, and you could drive through. I mean, three languages. I mean, maybe at that point I realized that I'm weird. Like I want to see the mountains. I want to eat the cheese. I want to talk to the people. I mean, and I realized I was a weird guy when I said that. Like, where did you fly into Milan, or we're only a half hour away or hour away, or did you? He was like, no, man, I flew into Zurich and drove 3.5 hours down. It's like, why would you do that? I was like, well, I mean, I'm taking advantage of the situation, but you didn't really take advantage of the situation. You made your advantage worse. I mean, I don't have an explanation for it, but like, I was out to sea.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's brilliant. You know, like, let's face it, we're partaking into a sport where you're not going to be millionaire for the rest of your life, but you get to travel around the world, and you're working nearly as hard as any other athlete to, you know, improve and be good at your craft. Might as well see a part of the world that maybe you hadn't seen before, or that you're very passionate about, or that you want to learn more from. You know, like I think it's very honorable, honestly.
That is my passion. It's like, how can I see the world through water skiing and via water skiing? So like that was, how do I do that? Well, I figured that out. That's what I did.
Yeah, for sure you have. And what are some of the places that you enjoyed the most that you got to see through skiing?
You know what? There was Ukraine. Ukraine was wild. I mean, that was out there. I mean, any like Russian-speaking territory, like so Ukraine or Russia, and then there was Korea was wild. Korea, I went there at least 5 times. So I went over there the first time, and then I kind of met up with a ski school that had a barge like on the river there, and I came back every year for at least 5 years, and it was amazing. It was a really good situation, and I'm a explorative eater, I guess. Maybe that's a term for it, but some people aren't in the U.S. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like one of the first things that you said when you came to San Gervasio this year was, "I'm staying in agriturismo," right? Like in the Franciacorta, which is one of the most famous wine regions in the world. Like, which again, my thought was you're almost an hour from the site, But then knowing you're like, no, I'm stoked to be here. You know, that's what I want to be.
Yeah. I don't come to Italy just for skiing, man.
No, I bet. And a lot of people come to Italy beyond, like, for reasons beyond skiing, you know?
In my vision, it's borderline rude that you would come to a different country and experience the culture. So,
Well, and you have experienced a lot of them. I mean, from South Korea to Russia to Italy. I guess you've been to Australia. You have been to Australia?
I've been to Australia. I've been to Australia.
Was it for the Moomba?
Yeah. Well, obviously, Mumbai, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, so I mean, I think that's a fascinating way of using our sport to, you know, to explore the world. You know, like there's people that don't even get to do that ever. You know, like, and not just American people, European people too. You know.
Yeah.
So, what's because you know you've been doing this skiing thing for a while. You know, what's something that keeps you going? Like, what is something that makes you want to go out at the lake and ski? Is it equipment still? Is it what brings you to the lake every day?
I'd say 95% of the reason I'm here is because of equipment, and then the other 5% is camaraderie. I mean, like my friends are here, and the friends I keep are are like equipment based regarding camaraderie. Does that make sense? So, for example, like I have Terry Winter, and I'm aware of the friends I have, and that they like to adjust their equipment.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, no, I can see that. You know, like you guys share a common passion. It's still within skiing. You're still skiing at a super high level, by the way. And yet the real interest is, how do I make this piece of carbon and PVC a little bit better?
As simple as it is, it's not that simple. Like, I mean, like, there's always something you can improve. You're always learning, and like, it really keeps your brain moving. It's crazy that like there still is improvement. It's wild, man. It's wild.
No, I'm sure, and we see it every year, which, you know, like brands of skis keep releasing new products and like trying to push the game and making wild changes and then going back to what they used to do but just tweak it a little bit. And I think it's enough of a change and in ever changing environment to where you can stay, I don't want to say stuck with it, but like stay passionate with it.
So I ski a lot with Chris Rossi, and we live in Utah together. And he works for Radar Water Skis, and he's, you know, he'll tell me like his new stuff, like what he did and this and that. I'm like, man. And at the time I can get jealous. And he will say something like, dude, I'm working in real time. Like, man, we just cut this. I'm ready for the next one. I'm ready for the next one. And, you know, in my mind, I'm like, man, that sounds like the real deal. It's like, I would love to be working in real time. It's like, boom, cut a mold, learn. Boom, cut a mold, boom, learn. But real life situation is that like molds of aluminum are expensive, really expensive. And you make a ski and it takes a whole summer to learn, you know, so a decade of evolution of skis, I mean, could be shortened very quickly, but it's not realistic. It's a tad bit interesting in the same token.
Right, because I guess, you know, because I was thinking, well, maybe if we sell more skis, then it would be more viable. But I guess the price of molds is not going to be dependent on how many skis you sell.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so Nick, I just want to thank you for this. I just started this podcast. I'm doing it for the growth of the sport, which I'm pretty sure you're passionate about as well. Seeing more people skiing, seeing more people on the water as we watch someone, you know, walking by the lake. Thank you so much for doing this. I hope we can get you back on the podcast in the future. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Hey, Matteo, anytime, man.
Thank you.